You can't fight gravity. And what we can see that the economics has started to shift in some sectors. In the US, 90% of the increase in electricity capacity last year was from renewable. If you think about EVs, currently in some countries is becoming the majority of vehicles sold. A good example would be China, with above 50%, or Norway. You need to think about the economics and not fight gravity, but embrace gravity and accept what the economics are driving.
Welcome to Sustainability Leaders. I'm Michael Torrance, Chief Sustainability Officer at BMO. On this show, we will talk with leading sustainability practitioners from the corporate, investor, academic, and NGO communities to explore how this rapidly evolving field of sustainability is impacting global investment, business practices, and our world.
The views expressed here are those of the participants and not those of Bank of Montreal, its affiliates, or subsidiaries.
My name is James Burrow. I'm Director on BMO's Sustainable Finance team, and I'm pleased to be your moderator for today. I help BMO's North American commercial clients address sustainability opportunities and challenges as part of their capital planning and business strategy processes. Our specific focus will be to highlight practical ways in which sustainability can support core business objectives, namely growing revenue, cutting costs, and enhancing brand value. According to a recent study conducted in February by our very own Climate Institute, which interviewed over 700 US and Canadian business leaders, 69% of respondents said they either already have a formal plan in place to address climate change or are developing one. This represented a rise from 2022. And while concerns about environmental impacts are a key driver, nearly half, or 45% of business leaders in the US and Canada cited customer pressures as the likely cause their companies will increase actions on climate over the next year. What's most encouraging is perhaps that 88% of respondents said they are confident their actions are making a difference. We're joined today by a great panel with deep experience translating sustainability best practices into sources of competitive advantage for their own businesses. Starting with Aysu Katun, who is Vice President of Sustainability at Greif. Greif is a US-based global leader in industrial packaging products and services with over 250 locations globally. Aysu leads the development and execution of Greif's sustainability programs with a particular focus on product environmental footprint reduction, sustainability-driven innovation, fair and safe labor practices, responsible sourcing, governance, and sustainability reporting. Aysu has spent almost 15 years in progressively senior roles with Greif, prior to which she was focused on product development and sourcing at HP. Moving to Tim Faveri. Tim is Vice President Global Sustainability at Nutrien Inc, one of the world's largest fertilizer, crop input, and services companies. Tim leads Nutrien's environmental and sustainability strategy and performance. He is a seasoned business and sustainability professional with over 25 years of industry experience focusing on reporting and disclosures, carbon management, and value chain industry partnership development. Tim represents Nutrien on the board of directors of US Farmers and Ranchers in Action. Tim was previously at Maple Leaf Foods, where he led the organization to become the world's first major food company to be carbon neutral. Lastly, we go to Torsten Lichtenau, who leads the carbon transition practice globally at Bain Company. Bain is a top-tier management consulting firm with offices across 64 countries, and Torsten's clients include many Fortune 500 companies across different industries and geographies. Torsten supports these clients in embracing the value creation opportunity associated with decarbonization. He has a particular focus on decarbonization of operations, supply chain, and commercial excellence for low-carbon products. Let's get started. Torsten, I'd like to start with you. Could you just start out by giving us a lay of the land as to what you're seeing across North America specifically? Starting with, what do we actually mean when we talk about sustainability? Why are companies pursuing sustainability initiatives, and what are they doing exactly?
James, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you today. It's a great question. I think at the benefit probably of being based in the US, but having worked also across the globe, especially in Europe, and being able to compare and contrast, I think what we're clearly seeing is that the landscape of decarbonization has somewhat shifted in the last few months or few years. Clearly, the regulatory support is probably less strong in the US than it used to be. And at the moment, we can also see that topics like tariffs or fear around recession are crowding the CEO agenda. And so one could think everything is being pushed out. I think that would be completely wrong. I think that's not what's happening at all. And I think there are probably three key trends we are seeing in the market in North America that are extremely relevant for the audience. The first one is I think it's critical to the average sector and the speed at which they are moving on decarbonization. What we can see is that in select sector, the pull from regulation, the demands from customers and from consumer is still extremely strong. And I think we see really this decoupling across different sectors in terms of speed happening. So a good example would be plastic or packaging or automotive or machinery. These are sectors that have really embraced the carbon transition, see a significant potential into these and are moving at pace. And if I double click on one, for example, packaging, what we can see is that clearly consumer have strong preferences around packaging. Often they mention, for example, paper or glass being preferred. So there's a bit of a competition across substrates happening. We can also see that half of the US population currently is covered by some form of regulation that clearly does play a role. And we can also see increasingly that there is a need to be able to combine cost reduction and decarbonization. And so that's a good example where packaging is moving really at pace. So theme number one is really the different sectors are moving at different pace, but the ones that are deeply impacted have continued to accelerate on the journey. The second point I would say is those who would succeed will really focus on value creation. I think we are beyond the time where we're just setting targets around carbon and decarbonization. People are now more thinking about how do I realize these targets, that they are still valid? How do I deliver? But also how do I monetize all my efforts? I'm investing quite a bit of money to decarbonize my operations, my supply chain. How do I make sure that I also get the upside from the customer or otherwise? And so most companies asking themselves, can I reduce cost and carbon in tandem? Will I gain market share or greater price premium if I have low carbon product? Can I access new source of financing if I'm greener? For example, green bonds would be a good example. Or will my investors value my company at a higher multiple if they think that I'm more resilient and can grow faster if I embrace decarbonization? And so a great example of this link to value creation is, for example, plastic, where we can see that all the plastic producers have really embraced the topic, have a very strong offering around recycling and low carbon, are trying to push it. When you start to talk about hundreds of millions of capex investment to get there, you need to have that link to value creation. The last point I would mention that I think is happening is you can't fight gravity. And what we can see that the economics is starting to shift in some sectors. So I will give you a couple of examples. One would be renewable energy. In the US, 90% of the increase in electricity capacity last year was from renewable. If you think about EVs, currently in some countries is becoming the majority of vehicles sold. A good example would be China, with about 50%, or Norway. It's also increasing rapidly in North America. In the US, if you take EVs and hybrid, you're probably at 20%. So the good example here is you need to think about the economics and not fight gravity, but embrace gravity and accept what the economics are driving. So that, if you want, the three key trends we're seeing. Now, the point I would probably double click on is around commercial excellence. I think increasingly the discussion we're having with CEO and with clients is around how do I make sure that I'm able to get the commercial upside with my customers when I have low carbon product. And we did recently a survey of 500 buyers and sellers because we wanted really to compare and contrast between the two sides across key B2B sectors. And what we found was really interesting. And the data you can see here is for North America. Sustainability of operations tend to be the number 2 key purchasing criteria, and sustainability of offering the number 4 when we ask people how they will make decisions the next 3 years. We also ask them, but if it's important to you, would you make different supply decision? And actually, 36% of them said already today they incorporate sustainability in the decision, and it will be 57% within 3 years. And we also ask them, but are you paying anything for that? Or is just slightly shifting the decision, but you're not paying a premium? And we can see that half of the respondents today pay some level of premium, and that will move to 2/3 within 3 years. There's clearly always a say-do gap in terms of what people say they will be willing to pay, but there's clearly a willingness, if the value proposition is there, to actually select supply differently and pay a premium. That is very encouraging, and I think that's a key element to look into. The other thing we looked into is what do actually suppliers do to bring their low carbon product to markets. And what we found here is that only a minority of them are actually targeting their customer based on their sustainability commitment. or the progress they've made or the neutral carbon price they use. So most of the time, they probably go to the market without a sharp enough picture of who cares about low carbon product. A minority of the sales force is able to explain the sustainability attributes of the product. And so there's clearly a huge amount of work required on the training side to be able to get there. And most importantly, we ask at the end, do you think you have the right product to bring to your customers? 85% of suppliers would say, we absolutely have the right offering, while less than 50% of the customers feel that what is being brought to market or to them meets the need. And so there's a huge gap that can be closed. That's very encouraging. What it says is if you're a leader in low carbon, if you have a good offering, if you're able to bring it to market, you can really get a commercial upside. And that gets then the flywheel working, because then you get the upside and you can reinvest in the topic and further accelerate.
And that's fantastic. Thank you very, very much. I mean, for me, the three key takeaways that I'm picking up on there is there's no one size fits all approach. You stress the importance of context. You know, leaders across businesses need to understand what it means for them in their particular industrial segment, but also their geography. I think the second thing is I love that don't fight gravity. That's really, really important. The only way we're going to achieve this is by doing sustainability in a way that works with core business objectives. So focus on that first. And then the final thing is it's maybe easy to underestimate, but people care. Buyers care about this. Now, the degree of the price premium we can debate, but we certainly seen from your evidence that it's a differentiating factor when it comes to selling your product. Thank you very much for that, Torsten. Aysu, how does that resonate with you? You've been really the architect of Greif's sustainability journey since around 2010. What was the why for Greif then? What is the why for Greif now around sustainability? And has that rationale changed? I wonder if you could just give us some thoughts on that topic.
Absolutely. And the reasons that Torsten mentioned about why companies do sustainability or why they should be doing sustainability really has applied to us throughout our journey. And our journey has evolved over time, as you can imagine. Our sustainability journey began about 18 years ago. So it's been a long time under the leadership of our former CEO, Michael Gasser. And at the time, his motivation was actually personal. He wanted to leave behind a positive legacy. So our early efforts were grounded in doing the right thing for our various stakeholders. And that values-based foundation still shapes our culture today. But as a public company, we also recognized early on that sustainability must make business sense. And, you know, there's no way around it basically for companies. So as a global leader in industrial packaging, we operate in sectors like chemicals, like agriculture, like food, industries that face increasing scrutiny around environmental or social impact. And in a sense, we were both fortunate and challenged by several of our large chemical customers who were far ahead of the curve at the time. And so they really pushed us to improve, not only to reduce sustainability and business risk in their supply chains, but to create shared value. So we began actually collaborating with them to develop sustainable and circular packaging solutions. And that was really a pivotal moment in our journey. It helped shift our mindset from compliance to competitiveness. So today, sustainability is really integrated into our business strategy as a driver for performance. It enables us to reduce costs, through greater, for example, energy efficiency or waste reduction, while also fueling revenue growth by offering responsible packaging solutions. And this gives us a clear advantage with our customers who are making sustainability central to their procurement decisions. So I would say at its core, our sustainability strategy is about two things. One, managing risk, which is really important. Two, unlocking opportunity. It helps us mitigate sustainability risks across the value chain while also aligning with expectations of customers, investors, regulators. Research shows that companies with strong sustainability performance tend to outperform S&P 500 over the long term. And that's largely because they are managing their risks better.
Thank you very much, Aysu. And the thing that I really picked up on here, and I don't want to just distill this down to a snappy soundbite, but that's kind of what I'm about to do is your journey is compliance to competitiveness. It first started with something that you thought you ought to do for kind of moral reasons or regulatory reasons, but now it's really, really a source of competitiveness. I'd like to kind of drill down on that point a little bit more. Could you give us a concrete example of one initiative that you're particularly proud of that really, really drove results that, really moved the needle for you?
Absolutely. And this will again kind of go back to what Torsten was talking about, value creation, about low carbon products. So one of the things that I'm really proud of is how we have been embedding circularity in both our product innovation and also service model over the last, I would say, 15 years. So if you go back as early as 2009, we recognized that most of our environmental impact comes from two things. It's either the raw materials that we use, specifically, virgin raw materials, or what happens to our products at the end of their lives. So end of life product waste. So based on that recognition or those findings, we actually made two very strategic decisions going back to 2009, 2010. First, we focused on reducing our reliance on virgin raw materials. What does that mean? Well, for us, that meant innovating products that use more recycled content and also down gauging. So using less material without compromising performance. Second, we built what we call our life cycle services network, which is a network of facilities in North America and Europe that collect used products and then recycles and reconditions them. So this circular model helps us to close the loop for our customers, especially the ones that really care about decarbonization and circularity. The business impact of that has been huge. We've mitigated exposure to raw material price volatility by using more of our own recovered materials. We've helped our customers meet decarbonization targets, our regulatory demands, including some of the EPR or extended producer responsibility laws that are emerging in the US now. And in 2024 alone, we actually generated nearly $1 billion in revenue from our sustainability-driven products and services. So this isn't just good for the environment. It's a competitive advantage that delivers real commercial value.
Fantastic, Aysu. Thank you very much. And I want to come back to you with just another quick question. It sounds to me like sustainability is something that you need to plan for over the long term and really excel in. But would it be fair to say that, our audience on the call shouldn't be too concerned by doing everything at once? It's maybe a question of starting in a place where you can really add value and identify a niche where you can really kind of build your brand around and then progressing from there. I'm just conscious that, given the degree of the excellence that we're seeing on the call here, it may seem overwhelming for some of our audience.
Absolutely. And we started, and I'm sure every other company has too. When we first started, we only focused on energy, our energy consumption, and with only one region, North America. So making it as focused as possible, as manageable as possible. And it wasn't even looking at emissions, just energy use. What can we tackle? And we started with data, actually. Well, let's look at what our energy use is in our facilities. Let's try to collect some data. Let's figure things out. So definitely starting with one or two topics that are the most strategic for your company is what I would recommend. This is, for me, an overall recommendation. When you look at sustainability topics overall, there are like 150 sustainability topics that a company can focus on. So, really narrowing that down to what's strategic for you is what's going to be successful. Otherwise, we're going to be too out there and just trying to do everything at the same time.
I think that makes a load of sense. And I'm actually kind of linking that back to Torsten's point around don't fight gravity. Figure out what matters most to your clients, figure out what's going to help you drive revenue, what's going to help you cut costs, and what's going to be most central to your business model going forward, and then pursue it. But don't fight gravity. I love that. Tim, I'd like to move to you now. You've had a long career advancing corporate sustainability performance. Tim, I want to start with your perspective as a B2B buyer, not as a supplier, but a B2B buyer. Thinking back over your career at Tim's, at Maple Leaf Foods, and at Nutrien, how do you look at your supplier sustainability performance? What sort of things do you typically focus on? And how common is that practice of, looking at supplier sustainability performance amongst large caps, like the three companies that I just mentioned?
Sure. Thank you, James. It's interesting because when you think about the issues that we're talking about, it's very different for every sector. In the food system, it's quite a complex value chain. And I think depending on where your company sits in that value chain, you have a different perspective with respect to supplier engagement, supplier programs. I actually, as you described the companies I work for, I've kind of swum upstream in the value chain, starting at a restaurant and consumer brand, massive consumer brand in Canada, to not only a brand company at Maple Leaf Foods, but a food manufacturer of protein across Canada, now to a company that sits upstream of all the farmers that we serve that grow the inputs and the ingredients for food across the world. And it's a different perspective when you look downstream or upstream in your value chain. I would say that in general, I think North America is still lagging Europe with respect to sustainability standards, programs, initiatives, particularly in the packaging domain, as EPR is just starting to get hold in the United States. But probably, I would say, around 2000, 2005, when we started to look at supplier engagement, those kinds of indicators that large caps or big corporates would look at were based on risk and the basics like price, quality, if we're in the food system, animal welfare, food safety, these kinds of things. A big branded company will need to control those risks associated with their business through their supply chain. And that drives value, not only from a pricing perspective, but from a risk mitigation and reputation management perspective. I think things started to pivot a little bit as well based upon what was happening globally. So in probably, 2013, 2015, things started to shift. Child labor in the supply chain, worker conditions. You might remember the tragedy in Bangladesh, Rama Plaza, with respect to the garment industry. Over 1,000 people died, and many consumer brands were tied up in that. And so the whole industry and many industries start to pivot towards those kind of risk-related items within their supply chain and hold their suppliers to program standards that meted their conditions. And then I think probably 2018, 2019, that's when KPIs related to greenhouse gases start to become very prevalent in supply chain programs, performance expectations of sharing data, even DEI. We saw a lot of requests from European, predominantly consumer goods companies saying, tell us more about your DEI programs, et cetera. So I think that it really depends on where you sit in the supply chain. For food, the largest impacts we find are in scope 3, whether it's upstream or downstream. And so many organizations have built large supply chain questionnaires, programs, codes of conduct. Some of the big ones like Nestle comes in a book where others are a one-pager, right? But as a company sitting somewhere along that value chain, you're going to have to know and respond to those requests accordingly.
What does it actually look like when a large corporate buyer starts implementing these sustainability initiatives? Is it just they drop a hammer on the supply chain and they say, you need to comply with X by this date, or we're going to look for other suppliers? Or is it a much more kind of gentle experience whereby there's, communication and these large corporates aim to assist their supply chain through that journey? Is there even merit in suppliers reaching out to their buyers and talking about the sort of sustainability initiatives that they might be considering and figuring out what's most material to their clients? I'd love for you to just reflect on your experiences with that.
I think you basically summarized what happens very, very succinctly. I think it's all over the map. There are some big corporates will say, this is the way we do business, you must comply. There are others, and I was part of them, where we would engage with our key suppliers to ensure they'd be able to meet new requirements that we might be considering to roll out. And that is often done through an auditing system that they would implement. I think that many of the big globals are quite collaborative. Walmart, for example, has a massive organization that they've stood up called the Sustainability Consortium, where they get their suppliers together, their key suppliers together. They work on data on overcoming barriers and challenges for them to meet the requirements of being a Walmart supplier, et cetera. Hand out rewards for the top performers in those categories.
Thanks very much for that, Tim. I think that's really helpful. Torsten, I'd like to come back to you now. For those, clients in the audience who are wondering where to start or even maturing their sustainability from some work that they've initially completed, what kind of practical advice can you give? I know you're a strategy consultant, so are there any no regrets moves that most or all companies should be taking right now? And are there common pitfalls that, can be avoided or can be easily short-circuited? I'd love to just get your sense of practical advice that can apply to many companies of what they should be doing.
It's a great question. I think we always aspire to be a pragmatic strategy consultant. So I think there are probably 4 or 5 no regret moves that would suggest. The first one is probably building on the point that Tim was making, is do the hard work to understand how does decarbonization link to value creation in your industry? Where does your industry stand on sustainability? Is decarbonization a topic, or other topic related to sustainability more important? And why would you do that? Is it more a risk mitigation point? Is it more complying with regulation? Is it that your customers will be asking for it? Is it that you can probably reduce costs if you become lower carbon? I think it's a critical element to make, and I think that helps you pace yourself. It's not that decarbonization is moving to the maximum speed all the time. You need to understand, where is your industry? Are you moving at a pace that gets you slightly ahead of the pack, but not so far ahead that actually you can't continue with the momentum? That's point number one. The second one is a no regret is, where can you reduce cost and carbon in tandem? A good example would be energy efficiencies, probably where people are going. There are a lot of innovation happening in this space where you can actually drive energy efficiency to the next level. The more you can actually combine the two, the easier it is to make progress at a fast pace and in a way that is absolutely palatable for the business. The third one is, I think it's critical to engage customers on what they need. What do they expect today, but also in the future? What you don't want to do is to be on the back foot and end up in a situation where either you lose market share or you get presented with a request that you can't fulfill. And so engaging proactively with customers is the third thing I would suggest to do. The fourth one is probably around regulation. Clearly, regulation will vary by clearly country, but also by state when you think about the US. Understand regulation where potentially pushes you in one direction, but also any subsidies available, and making sure that you leverage that to the maximum extent would be the fourth one. And the very last one I would suggest is engage business leadership. What you want to make sure is that you deepen the understanding of sustainability and why it's a business drive within leadership. Get the buy-in, because then you can move faster. So this would be probably the 4 or 5 no regrets move. In terms of potentially pitfalls that we see,
I'm conscious that all of us on this call sit in multinational companies who have the resources to create sustainability teams. But I'm conscious that our audience, that may well not be the same circumstance for them. They may have the capacity to hire one person to cover sustainability topics, or they may not have that capacity. Now, sustainability is obviously competing with many, many other topics on the CEO's agenda. If you're sort of mid-market, medium-sized enterprises across North America, can you offer some practical thoughts on how they would implement this in an environment where they're competing with other topics for CEO's time, for resources, and for when, staffing and FTE are constrained? What have you seen from some of your kind of mid-sized clients as they look to implement these agendas?
we do that a lot. Work, for example, a lot with private equity. When you have portfolio company or probably of smaller size and need to do it, you clearly need probably 1 or 2 people really focusing on the topic with a deep expertise. So that you do need, but you can be selective in this investment. I think then to manage to get some leverage is engaging the business and make it relevant for them. Because I think where you can get a force multiplier, if you get some key functions within the line, being procurement or sales or strategy, starting to co-own the topic and embed it to the agenda. Instead of being something that comes on top, it's something that actually helps them accelerate the agenda. When we think about selecting suppliers, that's one of the criteria. When we think about strategy, it's one of the key growth driver. When we think about selling, that's part of a value proposition. The more you can embed into the business, the easier it is not to ask for more FTEs, but to get it to work. And I think to capture the CEO, I think I've seen on the CEO agenda, I think 2 things working well is linking explicitly to the strategy, not probably coming up with a sustainability strategy, but to say as part of our strategy, this is where it fits. And I think the voice of the customer is the other one. I think CEOs do care about one thing, which is the customer and fulfilling the customer needs. The more you can bring to life why it's important to them, the more you'll get the attention. That's how pragmatically I would try to do it.
Torsten, that's good to hear, because just being candid, that's what I try and do at BMO. You've got to find the champions in the business. You've got to find the people in the business that really understand how it integrates with their day-to-day, how it can add value for their clients, how it can improve, their brand and their standing with those clients. Because all of us are in big corporations, but no big corporation has an enormous sustainability team. So you really, really need to engage the whole of the business in it and integrate it into their day-to-day operations. Aysu and Tim, I provided a very short reflection. I wonder if I could, kind of press on you both to just reflect on what Torsten had said there, with regards to how this, operates in your business. And Aysu, maybe I'll start with you first, if that's okay.
Absolutely. And maybe I'll continue on what Torsten was saying. When we started sustainability, I was the only person working on sustainability for about 7 years. So it can be done. It's really all about we're, I think, repeating the same things, but it's all about finding those elements where you can create value for the business. So for us, that started with our customers, really understanding what was driving them and how do we help our customers meet their, whether it's decarbonization targets, circularity targets, waste targets, or maybe they have regulatory reasons. So really understanding what they care about and then taking that internally to the organization and communicating that to the organization. And how do we make that happen?
Thank you very much, Aysu. And Tim, maybe we'll go to you next.
Sure. All great points. I don't know if I can add much else, maybe a little bit of color commentary. Over my career, I've always liked to try and frame sustainability into the language that's best understood at the C-suite. And what's that? It's what's material to the company, what are the risks, and what are the opportunities, right? So we present a sustainability strategy or a roadmap or action plan. We're addressing those three things. What are the risks? How are we going to mitigate that or lessen those? Where are the opportunities? And what we're focusing on is actually material to the organization. It's so easy in sustainability to chase a shiny lure of a topical trend or something with respect to, a stakeholder or sustainability. But you have to be pragmatic. You have to be focused, right? You have to speak the language of your C-suite. And I think that those are sage pieces of advice that I've, been able to utilize across my career.
This is fantastic. I mean, what I'm taking away is that the world is changing. Sustainability is a theme that is not going away. You see it across customer sentiment and how you sell your products. You see it across regulation. You see it in politics. It is changing. I'm almost seeing an image of the sustainability kind of leader within an organization being the person that looks out across the horizon, see those changes coming, and then partners with the businesses on how it impacts that business, how to mitigate the risks that are coming down the pipe and maximize the opportunities. But again, core theme that I'm seeing across all of this commentary is it has to come back to business fundamentals. It cannot be at odds with business fundamentals, which for us at BMO at least, and I think for everybody else on the call is very important. Yeah, I'd like to come back to you both again, Aysu and Tim, and really press you on one or two practical pieces of advice that you can leave our audience with today. But we've got a combined 40 years of experience in sustainability across both of you. I would love for you to impart some lessons and wisdom to the audience today. And Tim, maybe we'll go to you first.
I think particularly in today's economy in North America, probably more globally, a lot of colleagues that I've worked with across different sectors as part of sustainability roundtables of my peers, we have a collective feeling that sustainability has kind of moved into recessionary times as well, right? So that way, I think the bit of advice that I would provide is stay focused, stay pragmatic. Like we've said over and over, stay focused on what is of value to the organization, right? And creates value. So the other thing is think long term. So, we have to report on a performance on a quarterly basis. And often value is not generated from a sustainability initiative or program for many quarters, sometimes many years. So you have to have that data and narrative in place. I think what is going to serve companies well into the future is taking a long-term viewpoint of sustainability and understanding that it is a lot longer than, let's say, the next 4 years where the pendulum is kind of swung out of favor.
Yeah, I'll build on that. One of the points that we've already actually touched on, and for us, this has been a big learning, which is going back to trying to focus on everything all at once. doesn't work. I think there was an HBR article where they talked about how sustainability strategy fails because companies treat everything as material. And we've actually done recently a double materiality assessment where they have identified 80% of the topics as material. Obviously, you can't concentrate on 80% of topics. So
do you mind if I just interrupt you there? Could we just unpack that term double materiality assessment? Just want to help the audience understand, for those that haven't come across that before, what we're talking about there.
Absolutely. So in the past, it used to be just materiality assessment, where basically you are trying to identify the most important issues, most important sustainability issues for your company, the most strategic ones. And you go about doing that by doing research, online research. You interview various stakeholders, customers, investors, the communities where you operate. So basically gathering all that information to identify what's really important for your organization, and doing the same with your internal stakeholders as well. Now we have double materiality assessments. So it's broader in scope. It's also looking at financial impact of your material risks. So it's much broader in scope, and it's actually part of a regulation that's coming out of Europe. So companies that have a certain size of an operation in Europe, or they may be global companies, but they still operate in Europe, actually have to go through this assessment process. But ultimately, you again identify the most important issues for your company that you should be focusing on. So in theory, you should be narrowing down those topics. But what happens is, as you work through with, third-party agencies, or you're doing it internally, you realize, about 90% of these topics, according to the guidelines, are material. Well, that's still a lot of topics. So you again really need to narrow down your scope and really choose the 4 or 5 topics that you can really make a difference in. And that's valuable for you. That's valuable for your stakeholders. I hope that makes it a little bit more clear. And then the second thing that I always, talk about is data. Invest in data early, because if you don't have data, you don't know where you stand. You can't make progress, and it will really go a long way again in meeting regulatory environments. And I know that, in the US, the pressure is off a little bit, but there are still regulations in the US too.
Thank you very much, Aysu and Tim and Torsten, for your contributions. Really great discussion.
Thanks for listening to Sustainability Leaders. This podcast is presented by BMO. You can find our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. Press the follow button if you want to get notified when new episodes are published. We value your input, so please leave a rating, review, and any feedback that you might have, or visit us at bmo.com/sustainability leaders. Our show and resources are produced with support from BMO's marketing team and Puddle Creative. Until next time, thanks for listening and have a great week.
For BMO disclosures, please visit bmocm.com/podcast/disclaimer.